Huh. How about now?
Now we're live. Great. Welcome to Senate Education. It's Tuesday, May 4th, 1:07 p.m. For those watching and committee, a few quick housekeeping updates. As everyone knows, we did concur with S-114 today on its way to the governor. We are looking today at S-16. Senators will recall we did a side-by-side last week with Mr. Desmarais, and we're going to start things off with Jay Diaz from the ACLU, who was very helpful in both the House and Senate on this bill. The House is going to, it looks like, vote out 115, I believe, today, which is the miscellaneous, oh, not today. I'm looking at, maybe it's on notice.
It was going to be today. They have some amendments they have to consider, so they're going to do it tomorrow.
Right. So tomorrow, hopefully 115, we'll do a side-by-side, possibly tomorrow on that, depending whether or not we know and if it looks like those amendments are going to move forward. And then S-13 is still outstanding. I believe that also might be on the calendar, Jim?
It's in Ways and Means.
Okay.
So I haven't heard back from them yet. I believe they're doing an amendment.
Senators may have heard on the floor H-183, an act relating to sexual violence. Senator Sears in the Committee on Judiciary has asked us to review part of that bill, which we will likely do tomorrow afternoon, or if need be, Thursday morning from 9 until 10. If senators could keep that open 9 until 10 on Thursday morning, we may need that time to look at that, as well as some additional work. And then finally, I would just mention H-101. This is miscellaneous changes to the State Board of Education. We're going to continue to hold on to that. We may need that for additional work that might come our way later this week. But now let's turn our attention to S-16. This, again, is school disciplinary bill, now referred to as the Task Force on Secondary Exclusion. And actually, I think that the name has changed. I think it's different than what's on today's agenda. But Mr. Diaz, you have tracked this work, and you've been instrumental in trying to advance this work now for several years. I'm wondering if you might weigh in with the committee. We've been taken through the changes, and we're looking for your feedback and input at this point. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator Campion, and thank you to the committee for having me back. It's good to see you all. My testimony might be rather short. I was engaged with the House Education Committee and the amendments to this bill. I kept track of them and testified before the committee at their invitation, which I was thankful for. And the amendments that they've made, in large part, seem valuable to me. They took a good amount of testimony, I'm guessing you heard, from UVM experts, as well as data analysis and data folks at the AOE. So they have some amendments on that front, and they've laid out who's going to be on the task force, and changed a couple of things in terms of change things cosmetically as well. But I've also made some really important changes that the ACLU supports very strongly. So we feel that this bill was already great and is only improved with the attention of the Education Committee, and we hope it passes the House and then gets concurred with by the full Senate.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Diaz. Mr. Desmarais, is this on their calendar for today? Is this something that they are taking up today?
Yeah, they already took it up and they passed it on, I think it was second reading.
Great.
I can check that, but yeah.
So we're not anticipating then any major changes. So we're a little bit ahead of the game, which is great. Senator Hooker, you've been tracking this, and I know that and actually the entire committee, is there anyone else that senators would like to hear from on this? before we work to advance it tomorrow, I'd like to rest on the calendar for the night just to see if anybody else wants to weigh in. Actually, no, we would not advance it likely until Jeannie, if you would put it on the calendar for Thursday, that would be great, since the House will advance it tomorrow. And I don't even know, Jim, we probably can't even advance it until we actually get it back. So just thinking we are well ahead of our work. So we'll just have to stay tuned and just kind of keep it out there. But if anybody wants to hear from anyone else, please let us know over the next couple of days. Senator Hooker.
I just would agree with what Jay has said. Reading the changes, it seems to enhance the bill. It seems to make it stronger. Certainly adding a section in on LGBTQ individuals was important. And I think with regard to the task force, as we said before, we were kind of general about who should be on it. They were a little more specific, and it seems to make sense.
Okay. Great. Any questions for Mr. Diaz? Comments? Okay. Mr. Diaz, great to see you. Thanks so much. We're a little bit ahead of the game, which feels good. And so hopefully when we get this back later this week, early next week, we'll likely concur and send it to the governor. So stay tuned, but really appreciate all of your efforts. I know this has been something that you've been working on for a number of years now.
I greatly appreciate everyone's work on this. And if anyone has questions, you can always reach out to me individually, or I'm happy to come back before the committee. And I look forward to hopefully working with this task force to ensure that we get good data and good school discipline practices statewide going forward.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Committee, so now that it looks like we'll likely concur with this sometime next week or later this week, and that 115 is going to be coming back to us with a few amendments, I will switch the agenda around a little bit for tomorrow, since I think it makes sense to wait until we have a better sense, Jim, of the whole package of what we're getting back for 115. So I'll work with Jeannie and likely take that up maybe Thursday or Friday. All right, shifting gears to H106. This is the House bill related to community schools. We have had, it's a growing bill, and we are going to hear some additional testimony today. But before we do, I'm wondering, Jim, if you would take us through the changes that you have made so that we can see where we're at. And actually, Jim, I'm going to interrupt if you don't mind before you get started. I don't think a walkthrough is warranted prior to hearing from Senator Pearson. And since I know Senator Pearson is on a working hard in government ops in the afternoons, I can't.
I'm still in your shadow in Senate Finance.
Okay, in Senate Finance, thank you. But I thought it probably makes the most sense at this point to go through Senator Pearson's amendment, if that works for you, Senator Pearson.
Sure.
And for you, Mr. Desmarais.
I believe you wanted to potentially talk about H106 and H426. So
yeah, let's start with 106. And this again is community schools. And we already, as you probably know, Senator Pearson, we have put language into this bill that gets the study started to get us to universal school meals. So
terrific. Yeah.
As you know quite well, as one of the leaders on that issue, if not the leader on this issue in your committee, universal school meals and nutrition are a big part of community schools. So we feel it fits well into this conversation, making certain that, again, community schools are looking at dental issues, healthcare issues, mental health, all sorts of things. And so to loop it in, school nutrition, we think makes sense. So that's in there at this point. So if you would take us through just high level, if you will, what your amendment does, and give us some context for where it started, where it is now, people that the Ag Committee has heard from, that would be great.
So the language should be, thank you, Mr. Chair, Chris Pearson, Senator from Chittenden. Nice to see you all. And
Great to see you.
I'll just say to all of the committee, thank you. It's so rare that another committee kind of foists a project on you, and the committee graciously takes that up and does a lot of work, and you certainly have done a lot of work. So I have my deep appreciation for that. This language, and I am willing to be the author of it, but I also hope maybe it will just be the committee's language, should be familiar to all of you. It is the language that was originally in S100, the Universal Meals Bill, and comes actually from Senate Ag's 2 years of work with Rosie at AOE and the Vermont Feed folks to figure out how to systematize the local food, the farm to school story, basically, if you'd like. We, as you all know, for what, 10, 12 years, we've been doing well on farm to school. We're celebrated around the country for this. It's something we're proud of, but it's been really kind of one-offs. You know, a food director says, I want to do this. A school board says, we're going to do this, or a parent lobbies hard and a school decides to do that. And it's been very successful where it's been happening, and the state has provided small grants to help convert the kitchen, maybe get staff trained, etc. Support grants that go between Vermont Feed and the schools themselves. What we're hoping to do, and what we've all sort of said we should do, I think, in our support of S100 as it worked through, is say, okay, this now needs to apply everywhere. We don't need to be dependent on one food director that's passionate about this and makes this change. The state can really come through. What we looked around the country, and what we found was New York State in particular, I think Michigan, Oregon, a couple other states have landed on this incentive idea that says, in New York State, they say if you buy 25% of your food locally, we'll give you 25 cents a meal. That ends up being significant for food directors. And they've only been doing this 3 or 4 years. They, including through the pandemic, when, like us, they were doing universal meals across the board. They found some schools were buying over 60% of their food locally. Now, New York has a little advantage over us in terms of manufacturing. I think they have Nabisco, and they have some other big players like that. But still very, very impressive, right? But ideally, we would use these public dollars and parent dollars to promote our local economy, and especially our ag economy. In the budget, the Senate approved $500,000 to start this process. It was a one-time funds. The language in front of us here is the language to accompany that, to direct AOE to set up this program. It is, as I said, in fact, Rosie had a big hand in crafting the language with us over the last few years. And it sets up a baseline year one. And this is voluntary, but can go to as many schools as they want to do it. Year one sets up some definitions, kind of gets their gears flowing to establish this a program like this, and says if you're hitting 15% of your food locally, we'll give you 15 cents a meal. Then it considers the out years and gives schools a step. If they can get to 20% local food, they'll get 20 cents a meal. If they can get up to 25%, they'll get 25 cents a meal. We like that step idea because food directors are striving to do this, and then they're retroactively looking. And so they say, oh, the last quarter or the last semester, we managed to only get 23% of our meals locally, and so or food locally. And so we didn't want to then give them nothing. So that's why we, in the out years, give them a 20% or a 25% threshold, so that, it's not a kind of all or nothing. We heard about this in New York. Their mandate was maybe 30%, and they had some schools coming in at 29, 28%, a great success, and they didn't get anything. And meanwhile, they'd fronted the money. So we tried to learn from that, build some tiers in here. And otherwise, this is Rosie's language, and what the agency says will work and would help us to put into law now, because we have in the budget $500,000 for this, and we're somewhat confident that AOE would use it that way anyway, but this makes it more explicit, and it also puts pressure on us to deal with this in the out years where we haven't quite nailed that down yet.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, you're there? Great. Any concerns with this, Mr. Fisher?
Hi, yes, for the record, Ted Fisher from the Vermont Agency of Education. I'm our Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs, and I am a very poor facsimile for Rosie Kruger, who is taking some much deserved time away this week. So I would like to say, just with the caveat that I do not have Ms. Kruger's expertise in this area. I did review Senator Pearson's language earlier, and to my eyes, it looks good, and we really appreciate the work that his committee has done with us on this. I would like to note the original version of S100, from which this is taken, that the Senate Committee on Agriculture passed, does also have an appropriation for a position in there to the Agency of Education, which was linked both to this program and to some of the work that the committee was doing around the universal school meals question. Rosie asked me, we had a chance to discuss this before she left at the very end of last week. I will say she has not had a chance to review this language because we saw it for the first time today. But she did ask me to reiterate the fact that while we really appreciate this work and are totally happy to see it move forward, it will put an administrative burden on the agency and specifically some capacity needs to her team. So we would need to see that side of things solved to move this program forward and to make it sustainable in the long term.
As I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the position was put into S100. Mr. Desmarais, I'm looking to you if you would confirm, as I was the reporter on that, and I know I referenced one.
Yes, it is in that bill,
Right.
S100, but that bill doesn't go into effect until July 1 of next year.
Okay. Senator
I
Pearson.
also understand. Sorry, Mr. Chair, my apologies.
I was going to say the same thing, so it might make sense to true those up, but the Senate has passed that. And as I understand, that was not a new position, but a shuffle of a position. So I'm not clear on the funding implications. I had understood Rosie to have a limited time position at some, and I don't know how that intersects, to be frank.
So, Mr. Fisher, correct me if I'm wrong, you would prefer that we, and it seems to make sense, as we've taken parts of S100 and putting them into the community schools bill, that piece you would like to have it travel also to make certain, whether it's language and or money, and we can confirm this, to make certain that a position is made available to do this work.
That's correct, and I do want to note it made sense under the version, and I'm looking at the originally reported version of S100 from the Committee on Agriculture that came to the Committee on Education, I believe back at the beginning of March, perhaps. It made sense for it to be one position there because the workload is actually split between the two policy proposals. One would be this proposal that you have in front of you today, and then the other is related to the school breakfast and lunch. So I think part of the awkwardness here is that we've seen parts of this bill go in different places. We saw, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it might have been Senate Finance had a copy of some of this language at one point, and they had removed the position. I want to note long term, and I might be wrong about that. I'm working without Rosie here this week.
Yeah, no,
so
sure, that's fine.
apologize.
But there was not, just so you know, there was not an amendment that came from Senate Finance on S100.
Okay, my apologies. It may have been. I know that at some point as it went through the process, the appropriation for the position has appeared and disappeared a little bit, and we just want to make sure that it is there when we get to the implementation phase. We're going to need some additional resources to make this work.
Senator Pearson.
I wonder if we also, along those lines, could ask Jim to just verify that change didn't happen in the budget. This is some of the, because I believe Mr. Fisher's correct that it was in there and then it was taken out, I think maybe by approps, but then there have been so many moving parts. So it would be good to just verify. The other thing is, if memory serves, I don't recall, Mr. Fisher, maybe you could make it clear for just this local food section, whether or not Rosie testified that she needed an entire position or an extension of that limited service or a part-time. You know, we looked at it a year ago for just this part, and then by this whole year we were talking about universal meals as well, and certainly we agreed for the full S100 she needed support, but this discrete section that's less clear to me.
Yeah, and that is the issue, is that we know that there will be an administrative burden related to this. It is likely not enough to justify a full position. I know that the limited service position that we've spoken about in the past is related, I believe, and again, I might be getting myself into trouble here just because Rosie isn't with us this week. But I believe that is related to the summer food service program. And it is something that, as we see increased participation, we're hoping will become long-term. We can get, as participation grows, we can see additional funding there. But I might be wrong about that. That's the unfortunate issue right now, is that this is not a full position's worth of work, to our understanding. But we also know that the committee is interested in moving forward with universal meals in the out years. So it's worth us bringing it up now as we continue to grow the capacity and the policy work of this team.
So, Mr. Fisher, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind working with our Ledge Council to kind of just get to the final point on this today, because I'd like to get this moving in the next day or so. So if you and I can connect with Mr. Desmarais if you'd like, or the two of you, but around 5 o'clock tonight would be great if we just have some resolution moving forward on, is it a half-time, is it full-time, is the money in the budget, all that kind of stuff. Does that work for you, Mr. Desmarais?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Senator Pearson.
Thank you. Sorry to jump in, but Jim, could you tell us, I'm trying to remember if the money perhaps had some flexibility. Of the 500, I thought maybe 60 grand could go to AOE to get help. So that's another question to chase down. It may already be handled. Appropriations is usually quite thoughtful about these questions, and so it may be in that budget language. And I apologize, I should have had that ready, but
it's in the budget language in your draft for today. So of the $500,000 for the grant program, $60,000 of that can be used for a contractor.
Okay. I wonder if that's enough then to address Mr. Fisher's concerns.
Because it basically, go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
I can certainly check back in this afternoon and see in Rosie's absence if we can get at least a preliminary answer.
That'd be great. And Mr. Desmarais, if you wouldn't mind also just connecting with the approps folks, forgetting her,
Stephanie.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Just to
Yeah, I was
make
just
sure
gonna say,
that,
why not just check in with Stephanie Barrett?
what's that?
I was just gonna say what you just said.
Yeah.
Just check in with Stephanie Barrett.
Yeah, if we can check in just to make sure all those dollars, as Senator Pearson mentioned, there are a lot of moving parts. And I mean, I, for one, and I think senators recall this committee's enthusiasm for this piece of S100. It means, you know, breakfasts are going to be more nutritious. It creates this market, these markets, all of our districts with young farmers and old farmers, everybody in between, are, you know, could really benefit from this level of predictability out there. So I, for one, am excited to advance this, and with everyone's permission, but we can come back to this later before we adjourn, marinate on it. I'd like to include it in this into 106. And I do feel it just connects really well with all of the goals of H106. Any final comments or questions, committee, for Senator Pearson or Mr. Fisher? We're going to keep Senator Pearson here because he has an additional amendment for another bill, which Mr. Fisher may want to stick around for as well. Okay, great. So, Mr. Desmarais, any questions from you at this point before we just shift temporarily to H426?
Well, do you want to walk through his language?
We're not going to walk through it quite yet. We're going to wait, and we're going to do H426. Then we'll return to the whole kit and caboodle with on H106. If that's
okay. Yeah, sure.
So H426, while we have Senator Pearson here, reminding senators this is an act relating to the needs and conditions of public school facilities in the state. It is on notice for tomorrow. Senator Perchlik is the presenter of the bill. Senator Pearson, thanks for coming. Floor is yours.
Thank you. So the amendment is quite straightforward. As you all have outlined the inventory of our school needs, school building needs, I'm just asking here that we also include, as we're trucking around to all of the schools, a radon test. The Department of Health already offers these for free. They've found in 14% of the schools that they have tested presence of radon. And I first thought of this when we were looking at the budget and the PCB testing mandate in there. And I turned to the chair of approps and said, well, let's add radon while we're doing this. And she said, I'd rather you do that in H426. So here we are. Radon is known to be cancerous for people that have repeated exposure. And so this impacts and is dangerous for our teachers, for staff, people that are there more than a couple of years of their lives. And nobody wants to kind of uncover the story in the sense that we're afraid of what we might find. But you have, I think, wisely recognized now is the time to do this inventory. We've got federal money coming in, right to schools, potentially infrastructure related money. We need to deal with this. This is something we need to get comfortable with, get a handle on, and make sure we're protecting our workers in our education staff. So it's as simple as that. It just says, you know, in a separate section, Becky Wasserman was suggested we put in a separate section because we don't want to be confused that this would be using federal dollars for this. And, you know, the Department of Health already does offer, I can send you the link to their website where schools can request a radon test. So I'm assuming they are already operating under some kind of grant that we could use in this work. I gather it's quite a simple test. not very complicated. You'd leave something there for a week and go pick it up. So just hoping we could also include this kind of as we're doing this inventory work is, I think, important.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. And I think you may have mentioned this, the testing itself, that's free right now?
Through the Department of Health, yes.
Through the Department of Health. And we have Senator Lyons here and Senator Hooker. Any questions or comments for Senator Pearson? Mr. Fisher, do you have any, the agency okay with this? Seems to make sense. We want to make sure that children, teachers, faculty, everybody is safe. Without a doubt, it would reveal areas that, schools that might have serious problems. Seems like the timing is, dare I say, perfect, with the possibility of a federal infrastructure bill coming down from Washington. And that in itself could prepare all of our schools really, really well to take advantage of those monies. Mr. Fisher.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to clarify, Senator Pearson, you just mentioned the testing itself from the health department is free.
Yes.
That was the only bit that was surprising me. Okay. Yeah, I would need to ask, I would just need to check on with Secretary French regarding this formally, but I'm not seeing anything based on an initial review that's of concern. I just pinged while you were introducing the language, Senator Pearson, I just reached out to my our federal emergency funds manager for COVID to see where we are, where this fits into that, if it does. I'm hoping that I could give some feedback, but I'm not seeing a response from her, so I may have to ask to follow up with you online, Mr. Chair, with your blessing. But I'm not seeing any initial, but I'd like the opportunity to check in.
Sure, absolutely, that makes sense. Senator Lyons is the chair of Health and Welfare. Senator Lyons, you've been working on these issues. Thoughts?
No, I think it's a terrific idea. Of course, we had the bill in a few years ago, and for some reason, the testing wasn't included. I guess we probably should talk a little bit with DOH about what happens if and when radon is identified, and what requirements there are and what liabilities ensue should the radon be found. And then as long as we can link it up with resources necessary to fix schools, and sometimes it's really not expensive.
I've heard that as well.
Sometimes it is, but
Yeah.
so I think just talking with Department of Health to clarify some of these issues in a particular liability, I think would be important. Because we know radon exists across the state, and we've pretty much identified places where it's more apt to be found from the granite deposits. So that's all. I think it's a great idea. I'm always for it.
Yeah. Senator Hooker.
The institution committee room in the State House was
Yes.
one of those places that
Phew, we're not there right now. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Senator Pearson.
Well, I'd be glad to offer it on third reading if that makes everybody more comfortable and gives you time to talk to the Department of Health, because it's up for tomorrow, second reading. Is that right? And if you are talking to Department of Health, the one detail that I just made up was extending this to any school that hadn't been tested in the last 10 years. I don't have a sense if the program started 2 years ago, then maybe 10 years, we just sort of try to pick something reasonable, but it would be worth understanding that. I assume it's sort of a yes or no question, not, oh, now we have radon. So if they've ever had a test, maybe we could just say that, but that would be worth getting that piece of input if you do have another moment.
And we have something here from Mr. Demaray. Stephanie says the agency position appropriation for AOE, school budget program staff, is not in the budget. So that's back to 106, but we'll take a look at that in a little bit. Jeannie, are you there?
I am.
Okay, great. Would you reach out to the Department of Health and see what their afternoon looks like today? Love for this to go on second reading if possible. And so, we could, we're going to be on 106 for a while, but if they have any time, I'm willing to take a 15-minute break from 106 and have them come in. So any availability between now and let's say 4:30, since chair's meeting has been postponed. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that I think it's very good to speak to the Department of Health. I was going to reach out to them to ask because they have much more experience with the radon in schools issue than AOE does. And also just note that, and I appreciate the timeliness of anticipating additional federal legislation on this. We would probably, if we're looking at the existing federal funds we have related to school facilities, which are linked to the COVID relief bills, we would need to get some clarity from the U.S. Department of Education on this. And as well, if we were to use it as part of our state aside from the ARPA funds, we would need to include it in our state plan as part of the stakeholder engagement. So just wanted to note that, just trying to be forward thinking about as the trains run. But certainly, I think the health department does have a good idea of where the most critical areas in the state and what the right timelines might be. So
Right.
Appreciate the opportunity to say that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Fisher. And maybe you can also help us get the Department of Health in this afternoon. I mean, I don't know, honestly, sitting here, how do we, and I'm not advocating, but how do we not move this? I mean, there are teachers, staff, children, people visit also, so these are the kinds of things that people need to be made aware of, without a doubt. Senator Chittenden.
Yeah, Chair Campion, I was really going to say the same thing. Even with whatever the Department of Health is going to tell us, it just seems like we should do this. We should be measuring. We can't improve what we don't measure. And a radon test is something I've done the 3 times in my life I bought a piece of property. So why would we not do this in our schools if it hasn't been done in the last 10 years? So it seems to make a lot of sense to just include this. But sure, let's listen to the Department of Health. And thank you, Senator Pearson, for bringing this forward.
Senator Lyons.
I was chuckling while you were talking, Senator Chittenden. We've had this in this committee previously, and I don't know whether we've had it in other committees, but there's always a reason. And I think we need to look beyond those reasons and maybe send it over to the House. I mean, it's just way beyond time to do this analysis.
Senator Lyons, while you have the floor, the other one I just wanted to ask about is, we've made steps around lead in drinking water. Now, hopefully we're taking the step with radon. It leaves the PCB question. And we know that there's $5 million in the Environmental Contingency Fund. Does anybody recall if that is for testing or is that for remediation? And I'm looking to Health and Welfare or Senator Pearson. Because I'm just wondering, does it make sense for us to take this, step with PCBs as well? And
well, we could consider it, but I don't know. I can't answer
Okay.
your question whether it's for testing or whatever. But
okay.
why not?
Yeah, I think it was a test because that's what caught my eye, and I sort of thought, I mean, I live in Burlington, so obviously the PCB is sort of on my mind, but that's where I thought, well, geez, we should just say radon too, and I was invited to come to you.
Yeah. In the end, everyone's invited to come down here. Mr. Fisher, while you're doing your good work, would you mind looking into PCBs also and seeing what we might do? I don't know if it would require that Senator Pearson amend his language to include PCBs or if the budget already has those dollars in there. Mr. Desmarais, I see you've popped on. Do you want to add something to this?
Not on this conversation, but before Senator Pearson leaves, I wanted to have a conversation briefly on the language for locally produced foods.
Okay, great. Ms. Wasserman, great to see you. We have, as you know, been talking about the amendment you drafted. We are going to hear from the Department of Health hopefully later this afternoon, but it sounds as though there is consensus on the committee to move forward with this language. And we are also looking into possibly amending PC, to add PCBs, but we're going to wait to hear back from Mr. Fisher and others. Senator Perchlik.
I was unclear on the funding for this. And the PCBs part I thought already passed in the budget. So you wanted to add that to this or add this to that? And well, that's separate. And then I wondered where the money would come from, even though it's free now. I guess we'll hear from Department of Health if a consultant doing it, if it's still free.
Ms. Wasserman.
Yeah, so I did. So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So there was money for PCBs in the budget, but I did have concern. I wasn't sure if you had this conversation yet, but I did have concerns of the source of funds for this, and the way it was drafted was not part of the inventory that's being paid for out of the ESSER funds. Just that it would be coordinated with DOH. That they would do it and report on that. And part of that was, I think, a concern that I just heard that the ESSER funds might not, these are likely not eligible for ESSER funds. And it looks like maybe that's what is being looked into, but.
Ms. Wasserman, are you talking about the remediation if radon is found, or are you talking about the tests themselves?
I think arguably both, and I can have Mark or Jim jump in on this, but I think the ESSER funds are, I'm not sure the COVID connection, I guess. I don't want to make a statement either way on it, but I think my understanding of those funds is that there would need to be more of a COVID connection, and I'm definitely not an expert on radon and how that relates to COVID, but I don't see like the immediate connection there.
I could make a connection. It weakens the lungs and the respiratory system, so it makes you more susceptible to having the virus. I mean, but I don't know if that would hold up under scrutiny, but that would be one way of looking at it. But I think as Senator Pearson said, that DOH does pay for all the radon tests. So that one, the infrastructure remediation would be something different.
Right. I
yeah,
think
so it was drafted such that DOH would be paying for it separately for the testing.
Great. Mr. Desmarais, did you want to weigh in additionally on this? I mean,
I would just say
right now is the testing. Let's find out. That's what this amendment would require. We will hear from DOH and get a sense from them as to what happens when the school needs to be remediated. But right now it sounds like these tests are made available to schools.
Yeah,
we're just requiring it.
I was going to comment on the ESSER funding question.
Okay.
Simply to say you funded HVAC improvements with ESSER funds. That seemed to be a pretty easy one to link because air quality obviously has a big effect on COVID. Radon seems to me a bit of a stretch, frankly, because while I appreciate Sarah Lyon's point, it just seems to me that unless radon had like immediate consequences for students connected to COVID, I think that's a weaker link to make there. Not impossible, but I think it's harder to make that link.
Okay. Mr. Peralta.
I'm just wondering, this is maybe a question for Becky. When I read the amendment, it looked like the amendment assumed that the money would not come out of ESSER money, the way you drafted it. And so the question then in that case would be, does the agency have the capacity in their budget to do this for all schools? And I think you're talking to them this afternoon, but in that case, the money would be general fund money, I think.
Yeah, I think the way it was drafted was that DOH would be, I think is funding this. So I think the question is where that funding is coming from, since they are providing this service already.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, if we weren't to do this and every school in the state were to, ask for a test, we'd have to come up with the funds. We're just saying that we're kind of expediting this. again, I just go back to people should have this information. People should know this, teachers, children, their families, staff, etc. Anything else on this, Mr. Fisher?
Oh, well, I just wanted to note, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, my time with you this afternoon is limited, for which I apologize. However, I have reached out to the health department, and I also let them know about the PCB question.
Great.
I am also a poor facsimile of the health department experts on this, but I will just note that the PCB testing process is much more involved than the radon testing process. Humorously, to Senator Chittenden's point, I'm actually in the process of moving right now and ordering a radon test for myself, which will happen tomorrow. So in any case, I do know that the PCB testing process that Burlington High School went through, for example, most recently, is a more complex process. Sure. Just for the committee's consideration. But I have reached out to them, and we will continue to look into the ESSER questions on our end, and if the committee should want to move forward looking in that direction in terms of remediation, that's something that we can, of course, check with the U.S. Department of Education.
Right. Mr. Demarais.
Yeah, could I ask before Mr. Fisher goes, and while Senator Pearson's here, just to come back to an earlier point? Is that okay?
Sure. Let me just close this out. So we are, I think, in good shape with 426. We'll touch base with the Department of Health. Seems as though the committee is indeed interested in moving forward with Senator Pearson's amendment one way or the other. But we're also having some questions about what the impact would be on, what schools would be responsible for immediately if tests came back positive, as well as the question of PCB. So let's close that out. And now let's return to, if we may, H106, Mr. Demarais.
Yeah, just briefly on the points we discussed earlier, I mentioned to you that the AOE position is not in the budget. However, the appropriation for the grant program for the local communities grant program, sorry, the $500,000 for the grant program is in the budget, but it does not have the $60,000 set aside for a contractor. So that was part of the conversation that Ted was going to check with Rosie on. So the $500,000 is in the budget for this program, but not the $60,000 set aside for the contractor.
So just to confirm, so Ms. Parker, great to see you. Thanks for being in Senate Ed. So there's that language would need to be in there to actually be used. In other words, there has to be language that says 60,000 is going to be used to go to the Agency of Education for them to use.
I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and really that train has passed because the budget's over there and they cannot, unless the House adds, it seems like that piece is passed. Senator Pearson.
So first of all, I want to understand, and Brianna can tell us if it's 500 or 550,000, I can't recall, that went in the budget. But it seems to me that we would be able to reference that budget and say, 10% of this could be used to support AOE. In other words, don't go to probes and mess with their money.
Yep.
But just make it clear that we recognize there's some burden.
That's a great point. Ms. Parker, do you remember 550, 500? And
yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Brianna Parker, the Joint Fiscal Office, for the record. And Stephanie told me that it was 550,000. I'm happy to reconfirm that. And also just to point out that in the budget, it is coming from the ARPA state set aside for the funding source, as opposed to the general fund as it's drafted in this amendment.
So Brianna, just to mention, she quoted me section G200 of Senate H439. She gave me the language. It says 500,000 to the Agency of Education to make grants to local education agencies for the purchase of locally produced foods.
Okay, then yes, it would be the 500,000 and from funding, correct?
500,000 from ARPA.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we could add language, which is a great solution. Thank you, Senator Pearson, into this bill that says we could set aside 60,000. If the agency would like to, they could set aside 60,000 to support the work of part-time, full-time, whatever the equivalent is, to do this kind of work. Mr. Fisher, how does that sound to you?
So sorry, I lost track of my mute button there. At first blush, it sounds good. I will turn around and check internally to make sure it's something that we could make work as soon as I can.
Great. That's this time of year when we're all trying to, we're working on the fly a little bit. So I appreciate you checking in as soon as possible and getting back to us and copying Mr. Demarais. But that to me sounds like a great solution. We put the language in that sets aside the 60,000, and similar to what we did actually in, I think, the literacy bill in the end, we just gave the agency some flexibility around how to use those dollars. Okay.
Dare I suggest an up to 60,000, something like that?
Sure.
Or 50, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, committee, for this and all your time this session. Deeply appreciated.
Thank you, Senator Pearson. Great.
See you soon.
See you soon, we hope. Committee, so great work. I know we're moving to try to get some work done, but it sounds like we're advancing it. So let's see. We've heard, now we're on 106. Mr. Demarais, if you would be so kind as to take us through the changes in H106 that you have made, the genesis, the origin of those changes, and then from there we'll move into what Senator Pearson has proposed. So let's start at the top of 106 and go from there.
Shall I share the screen and put it up?
I have mine in front of me. I'm looking to see if anybody needs to see it on the screen. I don't see anybody, so why don't you just go ahead?
Okay. Let me pull it for myself. Okay. So for the record, Jim Demarais, Ledge Counsel, we are walking through draft 4.1 of your draft amendment to H106. The changes begin in the findings, and these changes came from your testimony on Friday. And so the first finding 1 reads, every child should be provided with an equitable education as defined by the agency, has access to the resources, opportunities, and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education, whatever their race, gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, language, disability, family background, or family income may be. And then it adds another sentence at the end that says, our public schools must be designed and equipped to fully deliver on that promise. And that promise is in the previous sentence about achieving student streams. And then in finding 2, which talks about statistics about low-income households, I've added this language here that says on line 6 on page 2, recognizing that students need fresh and nutritional foods to enable them to focus on their education, and that many students come to school hungry, providing universal school meals offered at no cost to students or their families advances the goals that community school programs seek to achieve. So that's to provide a link between this bill adding basically school food programs to this bill. 3, on line 10, this language that's been added from Friday's testimony. So it now reads, community schools facilitate the coordination of comprehensive programs and services that are carefully selected to meet the needs of students and families and built on the assets they bring to their schools and communities. Community schools combine challenging and culturally inclusive learning opportunities with the academic and social supports every student needs to reach their potential. Then in finding 4 at the bottom of the page, line 21, there has been language added, and 4 deals with the 4 pillars of community schools. And what's been added at the end on line 21 is basically a 5th pillar. So it says research additionally supports the necessity of safe, inclusive, and equitable learning environments to reinforce student success and well-being. These elements do not function independently, but are instead part of a unified and interconnected approach. And then again, language for Friday that was added in 5. It says now that this research also shows that community school interventions can result in improvements in a variety of school and family outcomes, including attendance, academic achievement, reducing systemic racial and economic injustices and inequities, and high school graduation rates, etc. 6 is unchanged. 7, finding 7 has been changed. So this is talking about COVID-19. And line 6 has new language that says these schools at their core are about investing in children through quality teaching, challenging, engaging, and culturally responsive curricula, wraparound supports, safe, just, and equitable school climate, strong ties to family and community, and a clear focus on student achievement and well-being. And then a new finding 8 has been added from Friday's testimony. Community schools are important centers for building community connections and resilience, where learning extends beyond the walls of the school through active engagement with community partners. As with place-based learning, relationships expand and deepen. Community strengths are highlighted, and opportunities for building vitality surface through shared learning. And that was it for the findings. Purpose is unchanged. Note that purpose talks about on line 17, community school programs, plural. And so I made conforming changes. Often in this bill, it was referred to as community school program. So I made change to programs throughout. Definitions. So now there are 5, I'm on line 7. There are 5 pillars now. The 5th pillar is at the very end, which we'll come on to. But there's been additions added into the existing pillars. So now the first one, integrated student supports. I'll just skip down to line 14. It says, and includes what young people bring with them to the classroom and the ways that schools and communities working together can enhance and embrace the knowledge and capacity that students and families can offer their schools. This could include educational strategies like universal design for learning, recognition, and respect for cultural and linguistic diversity, and practices that focus on building and supporting relationships such as restorative practices. B is unchanged except for capitalized beginning. C on line 9, active family and community engagement, which brings students, families, and the community into the school as partners. And it says where all students and their families feel a sense of belonging and engagement. This shall include broad student and community participation with a diversity of income, race, gender, newcomer status, language, and ability represented in the design, implementation, and evaluation of all activities, and is embraced by the leaders and decision makers in schools and communities. Then on the fourth pillar, collaborative leadership practices. So it has to include on line 6, a community school coordinator, and now an integrated school and community leadership team that include youth and family representatives, and may include other leadership government teams. And E is the new 5th pillar, safe, inclusive, and equitable learning environments. So that mainly came from testimony you heard on Friday. The definition of eligible school, I heard back from Dr. Boucher. She recommends this change here. So A is a school that is in the highest 25% of Vermont public schools for student eligibility for free or reduced price lunch. She has a list of these schools that would be in the top 25%, and she'll provide that. So I've bracketed that. And then has been identified for comprehensive and or. So if you say or, if you make it if you just make it comprehensive, that picks up on line 1 of the next page, 50 to 20 schools. And if you include equity supports, that would include 150 plus schools. So it depends on how many schools you want to include to be eligible for this funding. Then
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess it's a question for Jim. The language that I sent in to you that says that a school could be considered a community school with or without the grant funding. Where would that go? Would that go in here or?
No, because
Okay.
this is for eligibility for that grant funding.
Yes,
So-
okay, right. So it would come later?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep, okay, thank you. Just,
It's there. Yeah.
yep, thank you.
And then in terms of the site-based leadership team, students were added in on line 5.
I'm sorry, Jim, what page now?
Mine does not have page numbers. Hold on, let me switch to my
8.
paper copy.
Page 8
Thank you.
and top of 9.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Then going down to subsection C on line 15 now. So a recommendation for Friday that the agency use its equity lens tool in determining who should receive the funding. And then going down to, see, that was page 5. This is 6, nothing on 6 really. On page 7, nothing on 7. Page 8, nothing on 8 really. Page
I don't
9.
think your page numbers aren't matching up with us, so why don't you,
Okay.
because we have tons of changes on 8, tons of 9.
Yeah.
So you're up more like 10 or you're up around 11 or 12, I think.
Yeah, I'm on evaluation, subsection E,
Okay.
which is also where sort of alliance language appears.
Page 13.
Thank you.
Okay. So just first of all, 5, line 7, again, a reference to the agency using its equity lens tool now in the context of evaluation. And here is the language from Sarah Lyons that says has a caption that says ability to operate a community school. And it says any school district or school, regardless of whether it receives a grant award under this act, may function as a community school and may provide parity for preschool children in partnership with pre-qualified private providers as defined in the pre-K section of Title 16.
All right, let's turn this then to the floor to Senator Lyons to kind of take us through that reasoning and idea. Senator Lyons, you're muted. Sorry.
My husband would say that's a good thing.
I would disagree with your husband.
Oh, just kidding. So on the first part, apparently there are schools that would like to carry out activities related to being a community school, but are hesitant to do it for a number of reasons. So they're concerned about maybe some liability issues related to having people come into the school. So it's permissive language. So what I've heard from people is that just many school districts are afraid to enter into partnerships with outside entities unless they know it's legal, like community health centers, wellness providers, child care providers, and others. They don't believe they're allowed to open their food service program up to local elders. So there are a lot of issues that some schools have related to some of the activities that a community school might do, but yet the school would like to participate, or the district would like to carry out some of those activities. So that's what I've heard. And that's why the proposal for that first sentence, I guess. The second part relates to the preschool 3 to 5 year old parity issue. So my question is on that one, if this allows, it's permissive, so then again, it allows for schools to consider the 3 to 5 year olds on parity with, and there's a plane coming over. I won't be able to hear you in a minute. 3 to 5 year olds, they may not, the concern is the funding. Right now, 3 to 5 year olds are at 0.46%, I think, of parity. And if you put this language in, it'll make it 100%, which means then there are additional costs associated with this. But my question is, because it's permissive, may do it, it doesn't automatically put pressure on the education fund. So there are two thoughts within that one section that Jim has brought to us.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
Please.
Okay. So this language would not get to a full count. We have to make some statutory changes to achieve that goal. I think what you're expressing here is currently, just talking about how pre-K works for a minute, there's a $10,000 per year voucher, basically, that school districts pay to private programs or other public programs if the parent wants to take those children and put them in those programs. So there's $10,000 that the school district budgets and pays for 10 hours per week, basically. And that $10,000 comes out of the school district budget. And in compensation for that, the school district gets to count the student at 0.46 ADM count. So therefore it gets a tax benefit in return for paying the tuition. I think what you're proposing is to say, if the public school is willing to pay for a full tuition, right? So pay for wherever full tuition means, 5 days a week, full program. Then they would get a 1.0 ADM count. I think that's what you're saying.
I said it backwards.
Okay, good. So, so the way that would work is, just to clarify how these programs work. So a public school can offer pre-K, doesn't have to, it can. It's not required. And if it offers pre-K, the parent who resides in that district can send their child to the public pre-K offered in their district. Or the parent can decide, no, I'm working over there, like away, and therefore I'm going to send my child to a public program in another district or a private program somewhere. In which case, in those two cases, sending away to a private or public program, they pay $10,000. And that's where the ADM count comes in, 0.46. So just to frame the context for this, I believe. But your language you have in your bill now wouldn't get you there. We have to make some statutory changes and do some other things as well.
So the language that's here would then do what if it won't?
I wasn't quite clear
yes.
what you're sorry, I wasn't quite clear how far you were going with your language. So I didn't want to go make all these changes right now. I want to understand them first. I think this language would have to change basically to say, basically, if you offer, if a school district offers 100% a full-time program, then it gets the ADM count. So you have to go in and change equalized pupil calculations and that stuff to affect that.
So this means, I mean, I guess a couple things, if I may, Senator Lyon. So the clarification that you're asking for, I think is fine with me, around any school district, regardless of whether it receives a grant, can function as a community school. I mean, I don't see any red flags there. Do you, Jim? I mean,
well, the only thing there isn't the issues that were raised by Senator Lyons. The issue I had with this actually a year ago was the same issue that came up with cultural liaisons, where you're joint funding from a municipal budget and a school budget this position. And there's a section of law that says that the municipal budget has to be separate from the education budget. So there's a concern I had in cultural liaisons about mixing those two things. So we not withstood that statute in order to allow joint funding of cultural liaisons. My understanding of community school programs is that they're not actually funding a dentist. They're not actually funding,
right.
They're actually coordinating services.
Right.
They're actually like providing social services directly from the school budget. So I didn't think that was a concern here for that reason. I think Senator Lyons is raising other issues around liability and offering food and things like that don't concern me as a lawyer. So I think I'm fine with the reason she's presenting for why in that language from a legal standpoint.
Good.
Alliance.
No, that's an affirmation of the first thought in the proposal. And then Jim, in terms of the permission to provide parity, what does that do, if anything, for community schools? I mean, it is simply permissive, but do schools not currently have that option?
Oh, well, they wouldn't do that. I'm not sure. That's a question I've never had asked before. If they do have the option of, it's a school budget issue, so I think they probably do. If they want to send more than $10,000 over there to fund full time, I think they could probably do it, but they don't get more than 0.46 count. So they'd be spending the money without getting the benefit. And if you change the count if you change the count now to 1, that gets you into the whole weighting study issue because that's a weight, right? So
Right.
it gets you come into the realm of S13.
I might, it's up to you, Senator Lyons. I mean, if we do move toward the permission there to provide parity, I think we need some more testimony and maybe hear from the constituents that are advocating for this. It also likely means it's a trip down to finance, which might mean it might not make it all the way. So
I'm open to the suggestion I'm hearing by inference. I think that this is a really good idea. Another day.
Okay. So do you want to, so striking all of it for another day, or?
No, I would leave that first
Yeah,
sentence,
so
the
just
first
keeping the
part.
providing parity. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you, Jim, for your help with drafting that. And that looks like Senator Perschlick. Yeah, Senator Perschlick.
Thank you. When we say in that first part of that you may function as a community school, they would still, I mean, I guess anybody could just say, we're a community school, but we have a definition of community school. Maybe it's.
They still have
be
to
a
meet all the
community school.
criteria.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right. That's
yeah, no, I don't think there's any question about that. It's just that some schools may be able to meet all the criteria, but they don't want to take the step forward for one reason or another. That's all.
Okay. I'm fine.
You okay? Okay. Okay. Page 14, 15. It doesn't look like there are any other changes at this point.
Correct. Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So, and of course, this does not have in it yet Senator Pearson's language, which we'll poll committee members on before the day's end. But right now, I'd like to shift. Mr. Gambill and Mr. Downs have been very patient and waiting. And Paul and John, good to see both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So you've heard our comments and our deliberations on a number of things over the past couple of hours, but you are both here to weigh in on H106. And I believe it's you're both either it's one person testifying or both, but perhaps saying the same thing. I don't know. I have Mr. Gamble on first. If you want to start, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Senator Campion. I'm actually going to defer to John to start first because
Okay.
His testimony will have a setup for what I have to say, and we'll do our best not to repeat each other. So go ahead, John.
Okay. Mr. Downs.
Thank you, Senator Campion and the rest of the committee. I appreciate this opportunity. It was helpful to go through those latest drafts because I think this conversation will make more sense in light of that. I'm John Downs. I'm with the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education at the University of Vermont. And for the last 10 years, we've worked with schools and districts around Vermont, trying to help them develop more engaging learning opportunities for students. And since 2013, a lot of that work has had to do with implementation of Act 77. So helping schools launch PLPs and flexible pathways and proficiency-based assessment. I've also been a follower of the Learning Policy Institute, which authored one of the key documents that this legislation was built on. And I've observed over the years that the term expanded learning opportunities is particularly slippery. And I think the reason is because Vermont has done much more work around the whole notion of expanded learning opportunities than you typically see elsewhere. So I wanted to delve into that a little bit to sharpen the definition, because I didn't see this distinction emerging in prior testimony in quite the way I would hope. So I want to start with just, you might recall the Coalition for Community Schools was one of the organizations cited by the Learning Policy Institute in the definition and description of community schools. And their definition of expanded learning opportunities, I think, resonates much more to the Vermont context. So quoting here from one of their pieces, and the citations are in the written testimony. Community schools offer a personalized curriculum that emphasizes real-world learning and community problems. Community schools utilize innovative approaches that expand learning opportunities before, during, and, and after school, during the summer, and or by extending the school day and year. Further, they, in a document where they talk about the convergence of expanded learning opportunities and community schools, they say as more localities continue to explore new ways for providing ELOs, expanded learning opportunities, for their students to prepare them for college, career, citizenship, and life, the community school strategy will provide a vehicle and vision for creating and sustaining partnerships for successful learning opportunities. So the takeaway when I read these three characterizations of expanded learning opportunities is much more along the lines of what people have been pursuing in conjunction with Act 77 thus far. And that is to pursue expanded learning opportunities that really do kind of dissolve the wall between school and community, and to redefine the way time and the school day is interpreted. So it's a subtle difference, but it's an important one. If for no other reason, then we have an opportunity to build on some of the achievements that those schools and districts have done with expanded learning opportunities. We can start with a more ambitious notion of expanded learning than simply adding on additional services, but instead to deepen the way we view expanded learning opportunities. And I think it's particularly important given the unavoidable tension of adding on more work or more complexity to schools already embracing a number of school change agendas, whether it's Act 77 or Act 1 or any of the COVID recovery planning. So I just wanted to point that out, and I welcome any questions, because I don't think it's adequately represented in the way that the Learning Policy Institute talks about expanded learning. And yet it is a process that's well underway in many Vermont schools, and it does converge with, I think, a robust image of community schooling.
So what are you proposing exactly, just so I'm clear?
I'll yield to Paul in laying out what the difference is. I think that the opportunity, based on my reading of the literature and what we've seen happening in schools, is to end up with a definition of expanded learning opportunities that reflects that Act 77 image as well as the community schools image.
Okay, I mean, possibly. I mean, we'll hear from Mr. Gamble, I think, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. As you know, we are at the final stages here and not looking to recreate a bill, which sometimes can happen by altering a definition. But with that being said, the floor is yours, Mr. Campbell.
Thanks, John, and I appreciate the time today. And I want to give a shout out also to Senator Perchlik for helping facilitate me and John coming in, and what, as you said, Senator Campion, at pretty much at the last minute here. But I think the suggestion that we have is very minor but impactful. And I also want to bring attention to some work that is happening around the state that aligns so nicely with the community schools initiative, and want to be sure that the opportunity for programming that's already happening could align for possible funding. So I'm here as Executive Director of the Community Engagement Lab, which is based in Montpelier, but we serve schools and communities all over the state with creative projects that really help communities reimagine their role as a learning partner with young people. And in my role with the Community Engagement Lab as Executive Director, I'm also Project Director of a consortium of statewide education service providers known as the Vermont Community Learning Network. And these are about 9 of the top statewide ed service providers, including CCV, VSAC, the Tarrant Institute, Up for Learning, Mentor Vermont, and several others. The goal of the Vermont Community Learning Network is closely aligned, and the work is closely aligned with community schools. In particular, I want to point out the 4 pillars. The work of the Community Learning Network is about the partner coalition providing integrated support services. The Learning Network is about family and community engagement being activated through creative community engaged projects. We have a multi-stakeholder team in each of the schools we're working with that includes educators, principals, community members, and young people, providing a collaborative leadership model. And most importantly, we focus on developing more expanded learning opportunities for young people to be really centered in their community with their learning. So we'd like to suggest a couple minor changes, playing off of what John was saying about the alignment of Act 77, to be sure that the core tenet of Act 77, flexible pathways, is clearly aligned with the community schools. There is the definition of expanded learning, and I'm looking at the last version, but in the version I had, it was section 3 under definitions. Section B starts out, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, which may include before school, after school, weekend, and summer programs. And it goes on to detail more about that. But the definition...
just so I'm with you, what page are you on? Or what section?
Section 3 under definitions.
Okay, section. Just give me one moment, so I'll get there.
Through page 7.
Thank you. Okay.
That the very beginning of that definition of expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, which may include before school, after school, weekend, and summer programs. We would like to propose simply adding during school as part of that definition of expanded learning and enriched learning. If without the opportunity for during school, then the community school definition of expanded learning is really in direct conflict with Act 77, which states that learning can happen anytime, anywhere, and the concept of the school walls being permeable, so that young people can leave school during the day to learn in the community. So that would qualify as during school time. And right now that's not in there. This implies that the only time for expanded and enriched learning is outside of the regular school day, as it's currently stated.
Mr. Demery, do you see any red flags with that? No. Committee, any concerns or, I'm sorry, Mr. Demery, please.
Sorry, I don't see concerns with that, no.
Okay. Committee, any concerns with adding during school to that definition?
Belts and suspenders. It's always worked.
Suspenders, yep. No, I think that sounds fine.
Charter bill we had that
What's that?
didn't allow, it's a little like the charter bill that wasn't going to allow citizens to vote. We fixed that.
Right. Thank you both. Anything else?
Just one other mention, and this would be a little bit more of a significant addition, but in recognition of the coalitions of service providers and schools that are working together to build mutually supportive programming, to build those cross-network teams, we would like to suggest a model that the California Community Schools Partnership Program presented under the funding of having 2 categories of potential funding. Currently, right now, under Section 3 funding authorization, I believe the language is the Secretary of Education is authorized to provide annual funding of up to 110. Oh, it's changed, but I'm looking at an old version, 110,000 a year for a period of 3 years. And there's not an opportunity for a consortium of schools to apply to receive potentially less individual funding per school, but collectively as a consortium. So I'd like to suggest that, again, along with the California Community Schools Partnership Program model, there be two categories that could apply for funding. The first, as stated, and the second would be the Secretary of Education is authorized to provide annual funding up to, we're suggesting, $75,000 for each recipient in a consortium of schools, not to exceed $225,000 for the consortium a year. This gives
that can't happen right now. I'm looking to Mr. Demarais. Could that just, because basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mr. Gamble, you're saying maybe school district A and school district B and school district C, you want to sort of collaborate and apply together for funds.
Exactly, because of the challenge. Right. Yeah, exactly. Because of the challenge of the sophisticated systems change that are required to succeed at community schools, we feel that collaborative cross-site partnerships are the best way to advance the kind of systems change and the aligned network of resources needed.
What precludes that from happening now? We have districts that apply for grants, together to, for a number of different things out there, whether it's, curricular related or not.
If the language as is doesn't preclude that, then that's great.
Okay.
The way we read it, it seemed to say that an individual I think the language says each recipient. So maybe if a recipient can include a consortium, then that would be great.
Okay. What do you think, Mr. Demarais?
Well, so currently on page 8, if we go back to page 8, the definition on line 12 of eligible recipient, it means a school district with an eligible school or SU with an eligible school. So right now it's going to either a school district or a supervisory union. And before we get to the question of allowing a consortium, I want to look at the language again on page 9, if you could, line 9, where it says the Secretary of Education is authorized to provide annual funding of up to $110,000 a year for a period of 3 years for each recipient. So before talking about consortium, I think there's an ambiguity we have now looking at this language, which is what happens if a school district has 2 schools that are eligible? Does the school district get $220,000, $110,000 for each, or just $110,000 for both? So this is raising in my mind a different question. I'm not sure what the intent of the committee is.
So just in my mind, again, it could have gone the 110. Let me get to that. I guess I thought that would be for an individual school, is the way I was thinking about it. And that individual school would take on, because it might be a particular school in a particular district that would qualify. And that's how I was thinking about it. Mr. Demarais?
Well, so if a school district has 2 eligible schools.
Yeah.
Right? Are you saying that each school gets 110, or the district gets 110?
I would say the district myself, because if you're in the same district, you're coordinating between 2 or even 3 schools in the district, that one coordinator would be responsible for those schools in the district itself. I don't see a district getting, whatever it would end up being, $220,000 to do, the 2 schools. I think you're talking one coordinator for that district. That's what I'm thinking.
That's how I interpret the language to read now, but it's not as clear as it should be.
Okay.
So, first of all, that needs to be clarified.
If you clarify that, that would be great.
Yeah. And then going on to the second question.
Unless committee members are in disagreement about that. I'm just thinking in my own districts, there could be 2 or 3 schools that might qualify. I don't think, nor do I think the House's intention, nor in our conversations, do I think it would be, 3 schools in a district, each getting a coordinator. Senator Lyons.
Well, I can see it both ways, unfortunately, but I do think if it is for the district itself, that does create creative opportunities for the coordination between and among schools. And it may actually be of great benefit to both the schools if there are 2 schools. So we don't have a lot of money.
Right.
So I think limiting it to get started is not a bad idea, but I would hate to see a school fall through the cracks because they didn't have $110,000. This is a tough one.
Yeah, but I'm inclined to think that one school coordinator for the 2 schools, would be working, with, the same dental offices, the same mental health folks, the same, food folks. I would think in a way it could enhance what might happen if they're responsible for 2 schools instead of just that one school. And I think also allows people to use more, kind of broaden the, the use of the funds, if you will. Committee. Senator Perchlik.
I had a question for Mr. Gamble. Would that meet the work that you guys are doing with schools if it was within the school district, or are you guys coordinating between schools and separate districts?
We're currently coordinating between schools and separate districts because, for instance, so many of our schools have a single high school districts have a single high school middle school. There are only, I believe, a couple maybe that aren't in that, or very few that aren't in that model. But the other interesting point that someone had raised about there isn't much money. How do we best use the money to make the greatest impact? By potentially funding a consortium of schools from different districts that are working towards the same goals with the same consortium of partners and aligning their learning practices together to be more impactful and learn from each other. You could fund each of those schools at a lower amount than $110,000, and by the synergies created by working together, you would in essence be funding the work of a single school district at 110. And I'm going to ask John to weigh in on this because he is so experienced in the challenges of schools and systems change and the experience of working collaboratively across districts. John, can you weigh in on that?
Sure. I would just mention quickly, and I'm happy to follow up with additional materials. And actually, the Learning Policy Institute has wonderful materials in this regard about the value of schools operating in a network for a number of reasons. One is to enrich the teacher learning experiences. So if you consider how small some Vermont schools are, for a teacher to gather with like-minded folks often means they have to reach outside their school. So there's that particular constraint in rural schools. With community schools in particular, I think it's, and expanded learning opportunities in particular, we haven't gotten to the scale yet, but I think that's what we're aspiring to, such that community partners would engage with schools around a shared language and set of principles and practices, even though that community partner may be engaged with potentially dozens of schools. So without engaging with multiple schools around conversations, for instance, how are we going to assess students' community-based learning through the transferable skills? Imagine the community partner confronted with 6 different answers to that question based on which student has reached out to them to have a community-based experience, or which teacher has reached out to them to create an experience. So the hope of something like the coalition work or network work is to distill some of that complexity down to a manageable level so that community partners can engage genuinely in the higher order learning of students, as opposed to what's more common, where the learning as a whole gets pushed to the periphery and not treated as central to a student's learning experience.
So committee, I might need somebody to help me out here, and it might be Senator Lyons, but I'm feeling like we're watering this down by doing this. In other words, we're talking about getting, dentists, getting kids annual physicals, getting kids, the mental health services that they desperately need, addressing trauma. And this seems to be going, outside of that. But again, I'm looking to colleagues to say, no, Brian, you're wrong. Is it Senator Lyons, do you want to go, or Senator Perchlik?
Let Senator Perchlik go, and then
Okay.
I'll make a comment.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. On that point, I don't think it's watering down, because the requirements are the same.
Okay.
But I was going to suggest that we would just change the definition of eligible recipient to say school districts or schools. So if 2 schools want to partner up and do it, then we should allow them. Or if there was 2 districts, let's say, hey, let's do this together and hire a coordinator together and meet the community schools goals and the 5 pillars together, then I don't know why we wouldn't want to allow that. If they can make it work, then.
Right, yeah.
So it just may mean some language that offers flexibility. So
Yeah.
so just to offer diversity in how schools approach this. If it's a single school and you got 3 schools in the district and they're all doing it differently, then maybe they should have the full funding to do that. But if there are incentives in the bill for or suggestions of collaboration, that might make for some pretty neat outcomes. So maybe it's just some language change that allows for flexibility in the use of the funds that are available. So if it's a collaborative process, not to make it complex.
Right. No, I think
But
that's
some decision making about additional funds for collaborative processes. And I mean, additional to the 110, not 220.
Mr. Desmarais.
Well, I think where it might get complex is putting in those thresholds, those dollar thresholds, because if you might have 3 schools in a district that are eligible, you might have 1, you might have across 2 districts, 5 schools. I mean, so when you start to divide money up in a bill, when you don't know how many are going to be involved, one way to approach that, I think, is to make it flexible and say that it's available to school districts, a school district with a school, eligible school, or 2 or more districts with eligible schools, and the secretary can figure out how much to give them. I mean, don't put a limit on.
That's what I was implying, that it's the agency that is making the decision about flexible funding.
Yeah, and keeping it
for the flexible pathways.
Right. Mr. Desmarais, does that feel you have that? Okay.
I can draft that. Yep.
Okay. Committee, other questions for either of our witnesses for this afternoon? Mr. Gamble, Mr. Downs, final comments seems to be a good solution.
Well, thank you very much. I can't tell you how excited we are about this H106. I mean, this work is happening already in Vermont, and
Right.
our opportunity to be sure that those schools who are already advanced in it could be partnering together like we were just talking is very appreciative.
Well, it would be great also at some point to have you back, Mr. Gamble. I mean, this year, I don't think we've had you in committee yet this year, but to get a sense of the organization that you're the director of and how you're engaging and how you're working, and give us some examples of some of the successes and some of the struggles, I think it would be great. I mean, this year it would be impossible to do, I'm afraid, but perhaps in some of our summer learning, we could have a visit, or certainly next year. Great.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
I'd love to do that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee-wide. So I think we were at a good spot with that on 106. We have the agency, the Department of Health, David Englander coming in at 3:30. And then we have, I believe, Jade Nichols is hopefully going to join us at 4. And we have a couple of decision points to look at on 106 before Mr. Englander comes in. But let's take a 10-minute, 15-minute break, and let's come back then at a little, let's say 3:05. Does that work for everybody?